All right, we're going to call this meeting to order. Joan, roll call, please.
Director Hucker?
Here.
Director Kelsenberg?
Here.
Director Petrie?
Here.
Director Porbeni?
Here.
Director Riley?
Here.
Director Fatava? Chair Sherman?
Here.
You have a quorum.
Great. Let's stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. The next item on the agenda is to certify the 2022 payable 2023 tax levy report per Minnesota statutes 275.065 subdivision 1F. During a regularly scheduled meeting, the budget and levy will be discussed and the public will be allowed to speak. Julie Sink, Interim Director of Finance, will provide information on the truth in taxation requirements, including the current budget and the proposed tax levy for taxes payable 2023. The school board will give the community an opportunity to comment on this report. Only comments pertaining to this report will be allowed. Any questions asked will be reviewed and answered at a later time. With that, Julie or Mike, one of you?
I can certainly start.
Great.
Good evening, Chair Sherman, board members, Dr. Funk. Tonight we are going to talk about the truth in taxation. We're required by law to hold this hearing for the community and talk about the budget, as you stated earlier, and also the tax levy. If you scroll to the first page here, the authority of school districts is very different than the authority of either the county or the city. School districts must set their levy either by state formula or voter approved. So we don't have the flexibility that you would see mainly in a city or a county, that they have that kind of flexibility. So we are very, it's much more tightly held what we can do and what we can't do. Thank you. Thank you. What variables cause property tax increases and decreases? The changes in market value, which we have seen quite a bit this year, and I'll talk about that a little bit. Changes in class rates or history, the market value credit, voter-approved referendums, which we have had, and any state adjustments. So first of all, we're going to talk about the current school year budget. It's interesting that they have a requirement that school districts have to talk about their budget because the levy is actually for next year's budget, and we're talking about this year's budget. We haven't set the budget for next year, and we start that process after the holidays. And so we don't have a budget set for next year, but this levy and what we collect for this levy is for next year's budget. So as I go through that, you're looking at the preliminary levy, and we'll probably be bringing forward a revised budget here in the near future. So we show the actual revenues for the prior year, 21-22. You can see our actual revenues for last year were $116,987,000. We're looking at a preliminary revenue of $125 million, almost $126 million, which is a 7.7% increase. So that's the general fund revenue. We also have food service revenues. You can see that is decreasing, and that's mainly because of the change due to free lunches. So in the past couple years during COVID, we had free lunches. This year, it's changed back to normal lunches. Community service fund, you can see that's a little bit down, but we expect that's coming back. Building construction fund, we don't have a construction right now, a lot of construction, so you see that's our revenues are just really interest, and our debt service fund is to pay off any of our bonds. So total overall revenues is up about $7 million, a 5.3% increase. If we look at our expenditures, you can see again each of the specific areas for the district. But overall, the general fund increase is a 3.8% increase in expenditures. It was $118 million last year. It's $123 is what our budget, preliminary budget is. And your preliminary budget was set in June. You can see our food service is up a little bit. Community service fund is within, that's a balanced budget there. Our building construction and debt service funds. And so Those overall, our total expenditures are pretty close to where that they were expected to be for last year. And as we review our general fund budget, we'll be bringing that forward if there's any changes there, as well as all the other funds. This is a graph of the revenue sources, and you can see the majority of our revenue is coming from state aid. And when we talk about that the state is giving us a 2% increase, you can see that that 2% increase is not on all of our budget, and it's only on part of our budget. And this will include a state aid for special ed as well, included in there. Property taxes, you can see that's about 30% of the budget, and that's what we're talking about tonight. You can see our expenditure area by program, and obviously the majority of ours is licensed instructional. Almost 60% of our budget is simply our teaching staff. Going to the next page, referendum market value. We talk about referendum market value if we have a referendum, which this district recently passed. It's spread across the referendum, so it excludes ag, land, and seasonal properties. And so there is a difference between the two slides. But you can see that there's a steady increase in the referendum market value across the district over the past 7 years. The last information the district has is from 2021 calendar year. Of course, we're still in 2022, so we don't have those final numbers yet. Net tax capacity, those are the, you can see that also is increasing, and that's the entire tax capacity of the district. And this is a little bit more than it would be for the referendum market value. But that also is steadily increasing over the last 7 years. The general fund levies, you can see this is quite small print. However, this is very similar to what the preliminary levies that you saw in September when you approved the preliminary levy. Our overall total general fund, I'm not going to go through all of these since I already have gone through all of these when we talked about it in September. But our total overall levies is increasing from $37 million to $39 million. It's a $1.3 million increase. Community service levies, that is also increasing by $62,000. It's a small increase, but percentage-wise it's a little bit larger. And our debt service levies, those are pretty much staying the same as they have been in the past, a little bit higher, about $170,000. So overall total, we're seeing a 4.53% increase. Most people in this community have seen a 20 or 25% increase in the valuation of their homes. With this small of a tax increase, they are not seeing an increase in their taxes. The only people that may see an increase are those people that have had a larger than average increase in their home value. So they may see a larger burden of the tax burden come onto their taxes, but that's mainly because of that valuation increasing over the average throughout the community. If you look at the district's levy history, you can see that it's been pretty consistent outside of 2021 when the community approved your operating referendum, increase in an operating referendum and your technology levy. Otherwise, it's pretty consistent, below 5%. On an average, it's below 5% over the years outside of the voter-approved year. If you want to talk about estimated tax impact on property values, we do have this. We received this from our financial advisors, Ehlers, and you can see a residential homestead, if their valuation was $400,000, last year they were paying $1,500, and this year they would pay $1,200, or almost $1,300. So they would see a decrease. That's a little bit misleading, only simply because most people's value went up. But even if your value went from $400 to $450, you would still see a decrease from $1,512 to $1,448, even though your valuation up $50,000. So this is good news all across the district. Earlier, I know that Dr. Funk had presented something to you. This is a little bit different graph. This shows if your valuation went from, in 2020, from $280,000 to 2023 estimated $350,000. You can see that from last year to this year, your valuation, even though it went up, again, about a little over $50,000, your taxes are going up less than $20. And the same is true on a $500,000 home today. If it was $419 or almost $420,000, you were paying $1,590 at a $500,000 valuation. Today, it'd be a $1,608. So very small increases, even though those are large increases in your home value. So that concludes my presentation for the Truth in Taxation. Are there any questions?
Great. Before we go to the public's comment, or does the board have any questions? Yes.
I have a couple of comments. I know when you came back in September, we had talked a little bit about the non-voter approved levies that we have. You know, Q-Comp is one, which we never used to do in this district, which is, you know, almost $800,000. And then we have our long-term facilities maintenance that you recommended at the max, and there's no discussion on reducing that, even though that was the topic of conversation during that meeting as well. When I started on this board, we were spending $2 million less a year, and we had 3 more schools. And so it frustrates me that we're spending this much more for less buildings. I don't think that's necessary. I would like to see that lower. Q-Comp, like I said, is another $800,000. When we are spending we have maybe 300 less students than when I started on this board back in 1819, in that time frame. And we are spending, I have like notes pasted from my past board meetings in here, and there's so many slides that I'm trying to find where I stuck it. Here it is. Let's see. Hang on, I'm almost there. Sorry. This is 2018-19. What was our budget at? It was maybe $13 million more we are spending a year. And are we, as a community, getting the value for our dollar? And so I know there's this push on the school needs the money, but at what point is there accountability for the dollars that the taxpayers pay the district? And I struggle a little bit with, we've had a decline, we've had an increase in funding, and who is to hold administration accountable, or who is to hold, I know you're new, Mike, but the superintendent accountable. I mean, at some point, there has to be a value for our dollar, and it's our job to academically teach our kids, and that's just been declining since 2013, maybe 15 for sure. And I struggle. My taxes went up a ton because I'm not just hit by the school district, I'm hit by every other entity around here. And it's frustrating that during this time now where the job market is starting to shrink, it's becoming difficult. Expenses are through the roof, and I would like to see us not do everything to the max. I really would. I mean, I would be willing to, do maybe $2 million less on long-term facilities maintenance projects. We've been using those to do the community design team list, and I think if we just kind of scale it back during a time of uncertainty and high expense, it would be absolutely appropriate. So,
Any other comments or questions? Is there anyone in the community who would like to speak for truth in taxation? No speakers. Great, so I think that's it then.
Yes, it is.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right, now we're going to move into the study session portion, and wait, hang on, and the approval of the agenda first. Okay. I'll make a motion to approve tonight's agenda. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Okay. With a first and a second, all those in favor of approving tonight's agenda, raise your hand and say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion passes. All right. First is the consent agenda. The payment of invoices, November 24th, 2022 through December 9th, 2022. I'll go ahead and make motion to approve the payment of invoices. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Director Hocker makes a second. All those in favor of approving tonight's payment of invoices, raise your hand and say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes. All right, we have one action item today, and that is the audit presentation and approval. And we're welcoming Marie Schruel to the table.
Good evening, Chair Sherman, board members, Dr. Funk. This evening, we have our fiscal year 22 audit presentation, and I'd like to invite Michelle Hoffman from Clifton Larson Allen. She will be presenting this evening, and with that, I will turn it over to Michelle, and we will hand out board materials.
Yeah. Anyone? Do you want me to help or are you good?
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. As Marie just mentioned, I did bring some printed copies of the presentation. I think you all probably all received in your packet as well, but I know sometimes it's nice to have a hard copy, so I brought those, and obviously we have it projected, so hopefully I can, let me know if you can't hear me as well. I'll try and speak into the mic. All right, well, definitely excited to be here. Thanks for having me. As Marie mentioned, my name is Michelle Hoffman. I'm a principal with CLA. We're here to present your audit report for fiscal 2022. So, of course, that's as of year ended June 30, 2022. Hopefully my clicker will work. Excellent. So just have some summary level information to take a look at, some financial, just some operational, and I'll get into, just kind of wrap up at the end with our overall results of the audit. So just to start out with a recap of the enrollment for the fiscal year 22 in ADMs, or average daily membership, as we call it. So taking a look, there was a slight decrease there, just under 1% of enrollment from fiscal 21 to 22. Of course, fiscal 22, a little bit bigger of a decrease, which, you know, I come to a lot of board meetings, I work with a lot of school districts. That was obviously a trend in the, you know, COVID era. Decreases in fiscal 21, we were kind of seeing the same trend where schools are just really trying to even keep steady for fiscal 22. So I know that was really common across the metro area as well, but just under a 1% decrease there in total enrollment. You can see, you know, pre-kindergarten and regular kindergarten were pretty steady actually from fiscal 21. So hopefully that's obviously also a positive sign. I think your biggest loss there was in the elementary grades. Taking just a kind of another view of our enrollment, we look at, you know, your residents as well, and if you have enrollment, open enrollment in or out. So this takes a little bit of a look at that. So you can see, you know, total residents, and then our open enrollment out went up a little bit. But when you look at your net residents served, it was actually pretty similar and actually increased just a tiny bit from fiscal 21. So when you're looking at your residents who live here in your district and are choosing to, you know, attend the district, your net residents served actually went up just a tick. But then your open enrollment in from other areas did go down a bit and caused that essentially the decrease for fiscal 22. So that did decrease a little bit as far as students potentially coming in from elsewhere. So overall, again, a slight decrease there in ADMs from fiscal 21 to 22. Just a quick look, I know Julie kind of mentioned some of these things just a second ago, at our revenue sources for the general fund. As she mentioned, as you know, our state aids really are the biggest driver in the general fund. That accounts for quite the chunk of revenue every year, with our second piece there being about 25% coming from that tax levy that you're discussing tonight as well. Federal aid did, as a percentage, went up a couple of percent, as you can see in fiscal 21 and 22. We'd expect that probably to go back down to about that 2% range in fiscal 23. as there were some of those additional funds coming in for pandemic relief programs that kind of ticked that up 1%, but those will start to certainly be mostly spent down and kind of dwindle here as we get through fiscal '23. Taking a look at our general fund expenditures and just kind of how they lay out. As was also just noted, of course, when we're looking at our general fund, our biggest asset are our teachers and our employees. So 75% of the costs of the district go to salaries and benefits of the employees in the general fund. So you can see kind of the breakdown of the other percentages there, with purchase services certainly being the next biggest category. We also kind of a 3-year kind of look back here. I know the number is maybe a little bit small for those looking at the overall projector, but from fiscal 20 to 21, there was a pretty large increase in total expenditures. Some of that, again, was driven by those extra federal funds coming in, the need to certainly purchase additional supplies and materials for remote learning, et cetera. And then there's actually a decrease in total expenditures for the general fund from fiscal 21 to fiscal 22 of about $1.5 million. And then for fiscal 22, we have a little look there as far as where we came out budget to actual. Overall, in total, about $600,000 actual under budget, about 0.5%, which, on a budget that's over $100 million, we always say within 1 to 2% is pretty good and kind of where you want to land. So certainly being within 1%, certainly good kind of budget results there and right where you anticipated. Of course, as you can see, their salaries were a bit over budget while capital expenditures were under, so they kind of offset each other. Salaries over budget, the biggest area there, about $2 million of that was in regular instruction, with the biggest piece of that being at the elementary level. And then another bit of that over budget was in special education. And then capital expenditures being under budget, a lot of those LTFM, long-term facilities maintenance projects, came in a little bit under the budget. But overall, pretty close budget there with the general fund. General fund expenditures per ADM. We take a look back here for 5 years as well, so you can kind of see, when you compare to your students, how much in the general fund you are spending per student. Again, with expenditures increasing quite a bit in fiscal 21, and ADM's actually going down a bit. Of course, the ADM expenditures per student did go up in fiscal 21, and then decreased a bit again in fiscal 22. And one of the tables you have in your executive audit summary that you've maybe noticed is that we also, the most recent data we have for statewide or for other districts is from fiscal 21, so we're kind of a year behind. But we do have a table in there where you can kind of compare where you land as far as how much you spend per student compared to other districts as well. So if we were to look at fiscal 21, I have the numbers here. So for statewide districts in Minnesota, they spent $16,838 on students. So of course, you can see that you are, $2,000 less per student in 21 than that. If we look at the 7-county metro area, districts spent $17,659 per student in 2021. So obviously, you can definitely see you're quite a bit below that. And then enrollment for kind of the larger districts, which in Minnesota are defined as districts with more than 4,000 students, they spent $17,306 per ADM in fiscal 21. So certainly when you take a look at those metrics, as again, we're kind of year behind, but with something still to note, you did spend a fair amount, actually about 20% less than the average district per student in fiscal 21. Fund balances of the general fund. So we have a couple kind of lines here. We have our total fund balance, which is our top line, our blue kind of blue line there. Total fund balance of the general fund as a percentage of that annual expenditures. We do take a look at that. Obviously, you kind of think, how much do we have in reserves? If we didn't have revenue coming in, how much are we able to spend? So we look at it in total. So that is obviously in total, it's a little over 30%. But we focus even more on the unassigned. If you notice in your financials, of course, our fund balance does have different categories. Some of it is restricted by state statute or other external parties to be spent on certain things. So we want to also look at the unassigned to say, well, what do we have to truly spend on what we need to, if we need to, that doesn't have a restriction tied to it. So that piece, as you can see, is quite a bit lower and really just over 2% of annual expenditures. Typically, we try and recommend that be a little bit more to the 5% range, but you also some of it is due to that being sort of earmarked or assigned. So of course, your total fund balance is still pretty healthy, but just kind of two things to kind of take a look at. This table, I know definitely if you're in the audience, is a little small, but this shows kind of how we got there with our general fund balance. And just as I just mentioned, of course, there are lots of different categories that our fund balance actually falls into. The biggest section right in the middle there is our restricted fund balance. Again, most of these are restricted by the state of Minnesota, have provided you funding for certain programs. And so you might end up with some funds at the end of the year that haven't been spent that you're choosing to carry over. So as you can see, at the very top is our unassigned. Again, that's everything else that we can spend how we choose. That's about $2.5 million. Then about $16 million in those restricted categories. And there are some areas that funds were transferred in sort of from that unassigned. That's that middle column there, because we show, your revenues for restricted categories, what the state kind of gave you, what was spent. And there are some programs the district chose to, move some more funds in and felt that these were important programs that we just had additional funds to spend. So that's where the transfers come in. And then anything assigned, the bottom categories, is really just the district choosing to earmark them. It doesn't have to be spent on those items. It can be, reallocated, respent, moved to unassigned next year. But it's just a way to be transparent and just show some additional, things that you might know are coming for the next year and to just earmark those. So as you can see in the bottom there too, we kind of end up with our total revenues and expenditures and how they compared to final budget. So both of them within 1% of final budget. Moving on a little bit to the food service fund. I know this graph certainly looks a little bit interesting. Starting with fiscal 21, our first kind of full year of COVID. The districts were allowed to, operate that program a little bit differently. Of course, you were operating whether it be the summer food, or now we operate into what we called the seamless program, where all students were able to obtain free meals, and they didn't have to go through the process of, filling out income eligibility, and the district didn't have to kind of determine that and serve, free or reduced meals. Everyone had the opportunity to obtain a free meal if they wanted to, and that's why we're showing here that really the last couple of years it's been certainly a differently operated program with those free meals. And once we got into fiscal 22, where we didn't really have remote learning, a lot of people took advantage of those meals, which is great. That students were obviously appreciative of that lunch program, and so more meals were even served in total than in fiscal 20 and prior. So lots of meals served in fiscal 22, and those waivers did end in fiscal 22. So now getting back into a little bit more of the traditional free, reduced, full paid type meals. But lots of students certainly utilizing the district's food service program, which resulted in pretty nice fund balance because those meals were all reimbursed at a federal rate, which is higher than the state rate. But those are restricted to the food service. So one thing I always like to point out, you can't necessarily transfer that into the general fund if the food service has a nice fund balance that is restricted to stay in the food service program. Oops, let's see. Oh, did I skip ahead? I did. There we go. Still a quick one on the food service. Again, like I just mentioned, operating that seamless program with the federal government reimbursing at a different rate than the state does, or reimbursing them all based on free meals versus half price, et cetera. Definitely was a boost to food service funds in 2022. This is pretty common across the board. So generally, overall fund balances increased quite a bit in food service funds in fiscal 22. Again, those funds do need to stay in the food service program to really continue to operate that program. So you can see fund balance ended about $3.2 million in fiscal 22 as compared to about $1.5 million. So over doubled, fund balance over doubled from fiscal 21 to 22. Community service fund, similar graph here. As we know, fiscal 21 was generally a down year for most community service funds. It was not all programs were able to be held as normal. So fiscal 22 generally saw some nice bounce backs in the community service fund. So overall, increase in revenues and expenditures certainly over fiscal 21 levels, but also over what you had in fiscal 20 levels. And ultimately, activity pretty much netted itself out, and you ended with a fund balance of about $37,000. So that fund is essentially operating a little bit of a kind of a neutral operations, just keeping at that fund balance. And of course, almost zero fund balance last year. So a little bit of an increase in fund balance in fiscal 22. But certainly showing that, the programs are in demand. As you can see, that activity level going up. The community and the students are definitely using the community service programs. So I'll just end with a couple audit results. Overall, we are issuing an unmodified opinion on the district's financial statements for fiscal 22. That is the best opinion we can give. I know it doesn't really sound all that great, but that is the best opinion we are able to give. If we had felt we couldn't fully complete the audit or didn't have all the information, we'd have to modify it in some capacity, but we are not. So we're issuing a clean audit opinion on the financial statements. Yellow Book compliance, something else we look at. So, in addition to kind of feeling good about the numbers, we do actually look at a bunch of different areas, whether it's compliance, controls, et cetera. Yellow Book compliance is related to just government accounting standards. It's literally a yellow book, so it's called Yellow Book. But if we had any compliance items with regards to government accounting standards, we would report those in our Yellow Book letter. We have nothing to report there. Internal controls is another area we do look at. Everything from the small day-to-day transactions to year-end reconciliations in a lot of different areas and over a lot of different ways, just to see, if there's any kind of just areas where we might suggest a little bit of improvement, things like that. Obviously, we want to make sure there's checks and balances in place, et cetera. So we just have one item to note there, just making sure that all operations of the payroll process are really properly segregated between the HR and payroll departments. So just an area, kind of a suggestion for improvement there. So just one item to note with regard to internal controls. And another area we look at is what we call the single audit. This is your federal compliance audit. Any entity that spends more than $750,000 in federal funds needs a federal compliance audit. And we audit anywhere between 1, 2, and kind of 3 programs, depending. It's a risk-based approach. Usually the larger, riskier programs are the ones that kind of rotate in and out of being audited. So we audited several this year. As we know, like I mentioned, more federal funds coming, new programs that the federal government basically asked us to audit. So they are also, some of these programs are newer to the districts, and funds came kind of fast and furious at times, so just a lot going on with the federal audit. So we did test several programs. We do have 2 items we are noting with regard to special education and child nutrition programs. And it's really just shoring up some of the documentation over procurements. The procurement process when you're dealing with federal funds is slightly different than state requirements, so it does, a lot to kind of keep track of, and especially when you're trying to potentially, and I'm not saying this is the case, but find certain things for those federal funds to be used for. It doesn't always end up with lining up with the right documentation. So just a couple items noted there with regard to just getting some of that, showing up that documentation over procurements. We also tested the Education Stabilization Fund when we didn't have anything to note with regard to that program. And that's your ESSER funds and stuff like that, I should say, because sometimes people don't refer to it as the Education Stabilization Fund. The last couple areas we look at, actually the last area, we do also do a lot of tests over Minnesota legal compliance. Of course, there's a lot of state statutes that apply to school districts. Every year, the Office of the State Auditor gives us sort of a big checklist of different items to test, including procurement with state requirements, but some other items as well. And so if we had anything that was deviating at all, and it could be one instance out of a sample even would get reported, we would report that in our legal compliance letter, but we have no items to report in our Minnesota legal compliance letter. And then just a couple other sort of items to communicate to you as governance, just a reminder, an update that we do have a new accounting standard coming out, or that was implemented this year, as well as one coming next year. Our GASB, which is our Government Accounting Standards Board, seems to just never stop doing things and giving us things to do. So there is a new accounting standard actually incorporated this year into the financial statements related to leases. And in the past, leases were treated, and they were considered either operating, meaning you just kind of expense it as you go, pay as you go kind of thing, which was a lot of leases. And otherwise, it was considered a capital lease. And most leases actually didn't qualify as capital. A capital lease would then, you'd put it on your books as a capital asset and record the long-term liability, a 10-year equipment lease, et cetera, liability. Most of the leases really didn't qualify as that. I think they wanted more of them too, so they decided any lease that is longer than 1 year in term is now considered essentially a capital lease. So any of that equipment, facilities, et cetera, that are related to that are then put on your books as a leased asset, and the long-term liability also recorded. So no real net impact for the most part, maybe really small for at both the fund level and the government-wide, but you might see, wait, now we have these leased assets, what is that? So that's really what's going on there. Also, certainly required some additional work from the finance team to help us put that together as well. And next year, they're doing the same thing with the new standard, but looking at subscription-based software. So this is related to tangible leases. Next year, they're saying if you have a subscription-based software that's longer than a year, you're going to have to basically capitalize that as well. So next year, you'll see all the different software programs we might use in food service, student, data, all that kind of stuff be put on the books as well. So that'll be another one coming next year as sort of an update. It's essentially the same standard, but starting with tangible assets and then going to subscription-based software. So that will be another update as well. And then just to note, we would communicate to you as well if we had any, disagreements or things with management. Definitely nothing to note there. So just a bullet there as well. And that brings me to the end of my presentation. Does anyone have any questions over anything I went over or anything you saw in the financial statements?
Does anyone have any questions? We'll go to Director Riley.
Thank you this is great. Thank you
Yeah.
for your work you've done on this. This isn't towards you. I am extremely agitated or frustrated when I go back to the audited fund balances sheet for the general fund. And we have a 5% policy in this district, and we are at 2%, 2.07%. And then we see all the transfers from the unassigned out, right? So my question is to this board, and maybe, Mike, you can help me out a little bit, and I know you weren't here. We had 2 years of an influx of cash coming from the government. Every single time something came to this board, it was all about COVID spending, right? This was covered. This was money that was given to us that we have allocated, and we have to spend it this way. We have a policy of a 5% unassigned, which is low. I mean, Clifton Allen, I think we were acknowledging maybe it should be like 7 to 9 at the most last year or the year prior when we were having this conversation. Who authorizes this? Why are we in this position right now? This is the first, I'm aware that this was coming out of our unassigned fund balance. Chair, do you know, or were you aware that this was happening? I mean, I look at I'm flabbergasted right now, just flabbergasted. How do we get to this position?
I'll let staff address your question, but I think we all knew when we saw this was given to us, and it's below what we were advised it would be. So I'll turn it to staff to kind of explain some of that. There were options that we had before us when we thought it was going to be over, transferring some funds from our capital budget to move this. We opted not to do that because we didn't have a permanent full-time staff in place. But I'll let the staff here, address it. It's something I know as a board we need to address and get back in compliance quickly.
I think you're right. As far as capital, that's certainly one thing that we're all new here, so we're looking at this. I think knowing what's happening in the future with our operating referendum and the levy, the tech levy, and also we know some other funding is coming our way in basic skills next year. We feel very confident about being able to rebuild that. But looking back at last year, we just felt we needed to have a base, and knowing where everything was. It's difficult when you don't have someone here full-time watching that, and being able to make some of those recommendations to move some of that money, because our capital account did go up significantly. Some of those items could have been definitely transferred, and your fund balance would have been in the unassigned. It would have been at 5%. So it's something that we certainly can look at again in the future.
I know I can only personally say I'm thrilled to have Marie. Thank you, Julie, for being here on an interim basis, but we've had a revolving door of finance directors for years now. And so Marie, we're looking forward to taking fresh eyes and really taking ownership of this. And so it's certainly a priority for the board. So Superintendent Funk?
Director Riley, I cannot speak to what happened this past year, but I can tell you since 2005, I've been a superintendent. In any district that I have led, we've never had a fund balance below 12%. So we have our new finance director here, and we have already been sitting down talking about, okay, we really need to take a look at what's under the hood here and get a handle on this. Because Absolutely, and I'm glad you brought up the fund balance policy, because if you didn't, I was going to. Our fund balance policy is 5% here. And when you talk about accountability, it's really our responsibility as the administration to ensure that we meet the board's policy of 5%, and that's what we're going to do. So I apologize, I can't speak for this past year, but I can tell you that that's our target moving forward, and we're going to get there.
I appreciate that, and I agree. I know, we had, our finance director was retiring, but what I can say is I'm aware of the conversations that had happened and telling administration to stop spending. I know those conversations happened, and I think at some point, there has to be some sort of knowledge that comes through. Obviously, the superintendent is aware of finances, and you're schooled in all aspects of superintending the school, so you understand those things. But when I came in, we had, I think, an $11 million balance. And that was criticized by many, saying it was too much. And so they kind of lowered the threshold to about 5%, which may be a little too low. But I don't know, it's frustrating me. I had this form developed, which we now utilize, and this form was to tell us, so we didn't go through this problem again, what funds the money was coming out of. And that was to help us track, so we weren't constantly going back, are we gonna, be over budget? I expect administration to come and be within budget, especially in 2 years of an influx of cash. So I'm just super frustrated, and thank you for saying that this is gonna, be different moving forward.
Yes.
Thank you for that. I appreciate that. And I thank you for those comments. I think that we were all a little surprised to see a 2% unassigned fund balance. And, to Chair Sherman's comments, we have had numerous finance directors over the last 2 years, and there has been no stability in that position. And so, we've been given a lot of assurances or, about what our situation was. And so it is a little bit of a shock to get to this point. So I guess I'm wondering, to your point, you've had a chance to, you and Marie have had a chance to take a look at this, what our numbers show. How confident are you that we're going to be able to climb up to this 5% within a reasonable period of time, and maybe even beyond?
You want to talk? Go ahead.
Chair Sherman, Director Petrie, so one thing is to assess where we currently are in fiscal year '23 and coming forward to you with a budget revision. I'm pretty confident we can get there over time. One thing as a goal is to work with the board. There shouldn't be surprises on your fund balance, and I'm hearing that in the room today. Another goal is to put in place is to have quarterly projection reports provided to you so that you're getting an update on all your fund balances on a quarterly basis, so that your expectation when we get to this point in the audit at the end of the year, you've already seen your fund balance projection at least 3 times throughout the year. So those are things we'll put processes in place so that you're getting those frequent updates. And also when we do bond rating calls, there's multiple pulse points during the year that you'll receive. And so this won't be the first time or the second time when you're approving a budget for the next fiscal year. So we'll put those processes in place in the future, but I am confident we'll be able to assess where we're at and get that fund balance to where it needs to be.
Yes, Director Porbeni?
Thank you, Chair Sherman. Thanks for the presentation. I have a quick question here. I don't think any of us ever thought 2% was what was left. So this is truly coming as a shock to almost all of us. But the question here is, based on your calculations, what is the difference? What actually did you track as the difference between the last financial report and this report?
If I could please step in, it's really coming in our revenue. We overstated the amount of students that we thought in our budget that we would have. As you saw, that we continued to decline this year, that 1% that was said earlier, that's the big piece of that. There was a projection that we would increase, and we actually decreased. So if you remember what she said about expenditures, we were under what we budgeted, but we were also under what we budgeted in revenue. And that's where the decline came.
Any other questions? I just had one on the internal controls, the payroll and HR department. Does staff plan on taking any action on that, and if so, what?
Yes, definitely we are. We've already had some discussions on that. We need to work with the HR department and the payroll department to segregate who has control over pay rates is really what that comes down to. And so we're working with Dr. Cherry and her department to make sure that what they're doing is separate from what payroll is able to accomplish. So.
Yes, Dr.
Go
Kwon.
ahead.
Oh, no, go ahead. You can ask.
I was going to just thank Julie, so go ahead, Alden.
Okay. Honestly, I don't really have much of a question. It's more of a comment, and most of you guys have covered a lot of the really good questions tonight, particularly about the fund balance. But I just wanted to acknowledge that we have 2 years in a row now of a clean audit. And as it was acknowledged tonight, there's been a lot of turnover in our finance department. So to have our people turn out 2 clean audits, I think is something to acknowledge and commend them for. So even though it's not quite where we were hoping our finances were, at least we know where they are, and we can build from here. So thank you to our finance department for all your hard work.
And Julie has been the interim, for us since August, and she has done a great job of really helping stabilize the department, and I think she's got a couple days yet to help us as we complete the transition here. But I just wanted to publicly thank her for a great job, and I think everybody within your department and in the district office has appreciated your professionalism. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very
Enjoyed
much,
it.
Julie. The whole
You have
board
a great
echoes.
school district.
Thank you very much. Great.
And maybe, I guess before I leave, I usually too also want to obviously thank the finance department. Obviously, we're probably not the people they love to see. So I know we're not always fun, but obviously want to thank them. I know Lynn and Mackenzie aren't here. They're obviously kind of driving some of this as well. Julie coming in too, and then now Marie. So we obviously want to thank them as well for working with us to get all this done as well.
Thank you to your
Thank
team.
you to everyone.
Thank you.
All right, so our study session topics remaining would be the World's Best Workforce Report. And that's Caleb and Don. And Achievement and Integration.
You need to take action.
You want to approve?
Oh, I'm sorry,
You want to
yes,
approve
we
the
do.
audit?
We want to take action on that. I'm sorry. Do I have a motion to accept the audit as presented this evening? Director Kelsenberg, and a second, Director Petrie. All those in favor of approving tonight's audit as received, raise your hand and say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Audit approved. Thank you. Now we'll move on to the World's Best Workforce and Achievement and Integration Annual Report.
All right.
Welcome.
Thank you, Chair Sherman, Directors of the Board, Superintendent Funk. We are pleased to share tonight's World's Best Workforce Report and the Achievement and Integration Report. This report is one of the state mandated reports that we get to submit. This relates back to the World's Best Workforce legislation that was passed in 2013, which provides a guiding framework for comprehensive strategic and long-term planning. Now, a lot of the data that we'll see here, I've presented already once or twice this year, so spent
So this is going to go faster than.
much faster than I think the 4 hours combined that we spent talking about data and strategies and whatnot. So what we'll be looking at tonight is the actual narrative and data that we'll be submitting to the Minnesota Department of Education as part of our required report. So the first thing to highlight in talking about the world's best workforce is that it is organized around 5 goal areas. These goal areas are designed to shed light and planning into all areas of the school district. These have also been adopted by the board and set the direction and goals for our district. The first goal that we take a look at is that all students will be ready for school, ready for kindergarten, which means more than simply turning 5 years old, which is often how you would measure that. For Stillwater, we are looking to increase our participation in our early childhood programs within our district, but also we just value students to have an experience in school learning experience prior to kindergarten. And so as part of our process, we screened 662 children last year. We also surveyed our incoming families, how many of them, what percent participated in preschool. Last year, it was 84% of our respondents had participated in preschool. One other data point that we use as we look to measure how on track our students are in their kindergarten preparation is we use the fall FastBridge data. So we did note that this last fall of 22, which would represent the learning in the 21-22 school year, that 71% of kindergarten students received a benchmark score at or above the national 40th percentile. So with those data points, we would point to our goal status as being on track. One thing to highlight is all of our goals, we recognize these as multi-year goals, and our goal is that all students will be ready for school. The next goal area that we look at is that all students achieve grade level reading proficiency by 3rd grade. I'll tell you, this is one of the goals that we've had lots of conversation about over the last few years. This is a hard one to look at, and I'll tell you why. So we say on track, but then if you look below that and you look at the reading proficiency where it says 51.5% of 3rd grade students met proficiency on the spring of 22, how are we on track? I can't look at that and say 51%, half of our kids, little over half, reading and proficiency, that's not on track. Obviously, and we've talked about this repeatedly, we need to do better. And we've been putting in curricular components, we've been putting in interventions, we've been re-examining the role of assessment and the role that teachers play in that. And so I look at that and I say that's obviously, we could easily say not on track. If we simply looked at that 3rd grade reading proficiency score. However, it's important to also look at the other indicators that say, are we on track on a multi-year framing? And so I look at our second, I'll start at the bottom. I'll look at our 2nd graders last spring on the A reading. 70% of them had reached that 40th percentile, what we consider reaching the grade level norm. That's up from 65% the previous year. 1st graders, 60% of our 1st grade students reached grade level expectations. This is up from 48% the year before and is on par with pre-pandemic levels. Our kindergarten students from last year, 63% of them had reached that grade level proficiency. This is a 5-year high and up from last year of 46%. So I look at the third grade and I say, obviously, we need to do more. We need to continue the efforts we're engaged in, and we are starting to see the results of those efforts. So for those reasons, we look at this and say, we are on track. More work to do.
Just hang on a second. How do we come up with third grade being, how is that on track? So explain that to me again. I'm missing that. We're 51.5% of our third grade met proficiencies were on track.
For a multi-year goal in looking at how our kindergarten, first grade, and second grade students are performing.
They're
when we-
doing okay, but.
Correct.
But again, I mean, I'm looking at the slide, Caleb, and it says goal status on track, results 51.5% of our third graders met proficiency underneath it.
It's a multi-year goal, and that's how I would respond to that. So we are continually looking for improvement in these areas. Our goal, and we've talked about this, our goal is not to increase from 51.5% to 53.5%. That's not what our goal is. Our goal needs to be that all students in third grade are achieving that grade level literacy. And so, yeah, if we had a year goal this year that all kids would be at third grade, we did not meet that goal.
Okay. We'll reevaluate this. We'll talk about this.
We'll talk.
Okay.
Can I ask a question on that? So if the second graders are at 70%, is that to assume long as they just keep that same momentum at third grade next year when we do the same scoring, they'll be at 70%, which would be a rise from 51?
They're different measurements and different assessments, so I can't say that it would be a direct relationship to that. Again, I would point to, we have 5-year highs in our data. We're seeing improvements from the previous year. So while I would anticipate that the scores would continue to grow, 70% is not 100%, right? So we will still have continued progress that we need to make and continued work in our systems.
So I know, Caleb, just a quick question, because I know this is a point of focus, and we should say, you're relatively new to the role yourself, so this is kind of a rebuilding, but were you surprised at the results, the one that's beneath the on track? Were you expecting it to, I mean, I know it pretty much stayed flat, went down a little bit. Was that a surprise to you, or do you feel like the rebuilding is kind of just beginning?
I don't know that I was surprised. I didn't know what to expect, having only been in the district the 1 year.
Right.
I would say I'm pleased with what we're seeing in K1 and 2,
Okay.
especially right now as teachers are doing the progress monitoring and we're looking to see how many of those graphs are moving in the direction that we want it to. But there's more work to do.
Right. That's clear. We'll go here and
Okay.
then to Director Petrie.
I'm trying to understand where the numbers for third grade came from, and you did mention that there are different assessments. Are third grade proficiencies based on the MCAs
Correct.
versus, okay. So third grade is the first year that kids take the MCAs, is
That
that
is
correct? And they take them on the computer, is that correct, or do
They
they
do.
take it on paper?
Yep, it's
Okay, so this
computer-based.
is the first time our third graders are taking a standardized test on,
The second grade A
Are
reading
these-
test is a computer adaptive
computerized.
test
Okay,
as well.
okay, so at least it's not the first time taking a test on that. But then, just kind of connecting back, these third graders are the third graders from last year. So it was their first year back after 2 years in COVID.
Correct.
Right? So their first and second grade years, which are critical for understanding literacy, those foundational years were completely disrupted. Okay, so I'm just trying to paint a better picture for myself to understand possibly where these numbers came from and how there's such a difference from the other numbers. So at least I am hopeful that, I mean, unfortunately, this cohort had a rough go, obviously, and that they will continue to get the supports moving forward, because at this point, moving forward, they really are reading to learn instead of learning to read, and that's why that third grade is so important. So, okay, just trying to get myself wrapped around this. Thank you.
Director Petrie?
I just had a question of clarification, and it has to do with the benchmarking at the national 40th percentile. Why the 40th percentile?
Because the 50th percentile would be the spot-on norm, and so there is a range. Often, when you look at the fast bridge, it puts it down closer to the 35th percentile, and I'm not comfortable saying that 35th percentile or 25th is on grade level, so 40th is what we're using.
So they're saying 40th percentiles on grade level? Or 35th?
Yes.
Okay.
Director Riley.
I have a question, and it's not about your numbers. What does it cost? What is the average cost of a new curriculum? Just shoot off your hip. You don't have to be.
Like science.
For $750,000.
Okay. How many people, you said we have about 40-ish people now. I guess at some point, I just want to understand if doing what we're doing is worth it, or do we do better? I mean, at some point, when do we evaluate putting the right tools in front of our kids and our teachers?
As part of our process, even last year, we did look at the curricular program, the instructional program, and we did identify some holes. As you recall, we did purchase a phonics program for second grade. That was not part of our system. This last fall, we brought in a phonemic awareness program for kindergarten and first grade. So we are identifying those components that need to be included. We also increased our support and expectation of using the press reading intervention program that all staff use as part of their Tier 2 intervention. So we do, as part of our ongoing continuous improvement, identify what are the areas that we need to focus in on. Also recognizing that no program does everything well. And so we're really targeting what are the components that we need to focus on, and that's where the phonics and the explicit phonics and explicit phonemic awareness programs came in.
Right, which is great, right? We're trying to do better, but we put in a curriculum that actually had no studies to support it when we put it in, right? We put something bad in front of our kids. And we continue to utilize this curriculum. I mean, at some point, should we not be looking at a better curriculum? I know the trust for me is gone with that author. There is no trust for me. And I just, at some point, I would love to see this board actually, allow Caleb to go out and bring people together and put something in front of our teachers and students that will really benefit them, because every year harms them, that they don't have what they need.
Yes, Director Corbeny.
Thank you, Chair Sherman. Thank you. It looks like every time we're out here, the numbers are still the same. There's never a track of improvement. I'm looking at, I know we're not there yet, but I'm looking at the achievement gaps as well. What can we do differently? I mean, for me, just coming out here and saying we have to do something differently is concerning, just in general. I don't think curriculum is the answer to it. It's not the only answer to it. There's so many other things that we have to take into consideration. Curriculum is just one. If you put the best curriculum in front of the kids, it's the application and the how. I think that is the most important thing, but that's just one. There are other things that might be impacting just the trajectory of how our kids are being supported, or the process in terms of what we think might be the ideal process for development. Personally, I think we should aim a lot higher. The SKUs for me, 40% is pretty low. I know it's the national average, I know that. But I do believe that we can do better than that, regardless of the fact that we're a public school system. So my question to you is, what can we do differently? What is the plan? Because I'm a bit concerned about, and you will go to the achievement gaps too, I'm a bit concerned about that. It's like every year is the same, it's even getting worse. That's a concern. There's something going on that's not helping us as you know.
So one of the things that you're going to hear recommended sometime this later winter, probably February timeframe, is we're going to be asking the board to approve the Achievement and Integration Grant for the future here. One of the things that we've really identified here in Stillwater is we have an evolving demographic of students, and our community is evolving. And so we have a cultural liaison for the school district. Where I come from and from where there's a lot of other districts in Minnesota utilize the achievement integration dollars so that there are cultural liaisons in every building. And the purpose of the liaisons is really they're working with staff on different cultures within the building. They're a point of contact for parents, liaisoning with the staff, and they're a resource for the students as well. So, he's going to show you a slide here, I think, coming up that, we haven't closed much of the achievement gap. But that's going to be a recommendation that I'm going to bring forward, and I know Dawn is working on it. And we've met with Eric Anderson and Cornelius. And so I think that is an area of focus that I think we're going to try to shift. And that's not the complete answer, but it's another resource that through the grant we would, and again, it's a reshaping of the focus of the grant. So that's one approach.
Did you hear that? No. Okay. Well, I know, and you can see on the board, there's a great amount of concern on our literacy and scores, and so I know we've spent a lot of time talking about it, and we will continue to do so on this particular goal, but I just want to say I am optimistic that we're laying some good foundations here, and so I know that it's hard, right, because as a board, we're not doing the work that you're doing, we're not seeing the work that you're doing daily, we're kind of getting these updates, and it's not where we want them to be, but I know that you're putting in so much work, and I know that Mike, you're tireless. Everyone here is tireless and new, and we're assessing and getting things going. And so I'm optimistic, but I think what you're sensing from the board is just frustration for, wanting to make some strides.
And I think what I'm trying to get the approach we're trying to provide you with is full candor here. All right, we are not hiding anything here that we need to do better, and we, and I think. The amount of work that Caleb, his team, the principals and the teachers are doing right now is just, okay, they feel it. So that's what we're going to do here.
All right.
Yeah, and I would actually agree with pretty much everything that has been said at the board table. And I would just sort of also add that one of the reasons why Dr. Funk came to the top of the pile, if you will, when we were looking to hire a new superintendent, is that he has already dealt with a lot of growth in the Albert Lee area, in students of color and achievement issues, and has had a tremendous amount of success in that regard. It's one of the major reasons, I think, why we chose you. And so I think we all, although we are not real happy with the numbers that we have right now, we are looking forward to, you and Caleb and other new members of the administration bringing fresh eyes to this situation and figuring how we can improve, because we have to improve.
Doc-
I'm going to be
Dr.
quick.
Corbett?
I just have a quick question here, because sometimes we have to look at the symptoms as to why this is happening. Can you, based on you've been here about a year, right?
Year and a half.
Year and a half, yeah. Can you tell, based on the reports that you've been presenting so far, can you tell why the gaps keep going up? Can you really tell, do you know what the symptoms are as to why that's happening?
Do we want to move on to the next slide, because that
Sure,
will
let's
deal
go-
with
let's
that?
go-
Let's move on to the next slide,
Yeah.
which is the closing the achievement gaps, and we'll let Caleb.
If I can just address one
Yep.
point from the previous slide, which is the 40th percentile. I just want to reiterate that it's a norm referenced assessment, so 50% of the nation will score above, 50% below that mark of 50th percentile. And 40th is where FastBridge has set the indicator for being at low risk of not meeting standards. So that is why we use that 40th percentile. So it's not a number that we randomly selected. It comes directly out of the psychometricians of FastBridge to say, this is the moment at which a student is at low risk for not performing well.
Thank you for that clarification. Oh,
One more before you go on, too. As I'm looking, we're measuring, as they get ready for school, we're measuring at third grade, and then we're measuring when they're leaving high school. Do we do any measuring in between that third grade and leaving high school? That should be,
Frequently, yes.
Okay.
The World's Best Workforce, again, is organized around 5 key goal areas, and so the one explicitly is reading by third grade. And so that's why we report specifically on that one.
okay.
As part of our data presentation before, I think I highlighted all the different grade levels and the different assessments that we've used to measure that progress.
All right, thanks.
So the next slide, we started talking about a little bit, which is the goal is to close and eliminate the achievement gaps between student groups. And here you see that, we're not on track. And I think we already anticipated this as we were in our conversations. The one caveat I would say in reading gaps to white cohort, our black population of students, we actually decreased the gap from 26 to 23. So that was a typo on the slide there. However, again, I can't look at a gap of 23% and say we're doing what we need to be doing in terms of performance. So again, you see gaps across reading and math and science. We did, and it's not referenced here, and you may recall last year we talked about our EL population in science, and 0% of our students had met proficiency. This last year, that increased to 13%. So we do see some increases, we do see some gains here, but overall, and we need to do more root cause analysis of this, certainly. We certainly need to reach out to our students, and we have an opportunity with the achievement and integration to build out, which is the next part of this presentation, to build out goals and plans and organize around those. I would say the one area that we are certainly focused in quite a bit this year, and will be for the next 3 as we recenter on our professional learning community work, which is all around looking at the data, looking at our students, looking at what their needs are, organizing, setting goals, looking at how we can better serve our students of need, and then looking at that data to see how we're doing. So as part of our work with Solution Tree, there were about 60 staff, administrators, teachers, coaches, working with Solution Tree this last week, looking at how do we become more instructionally agile? How do we take a look at the data that we're receiving and adjust our instruction even on the fly in the moment so that we can respond to those areas where students aren't learning so that we can provide the structures, we can provide the interventions, we can provide the support that those students need. And so really focusing deep into the 4 questions are so critical. What do we want students to know and be able to do? How are we going to know that they get there? What will we do if they don't? And so as we continue to build the structures and build the supports for those conversations, that is one structure that will support our growth in every subject area for every student.
Are you optimistic that will be it?
I don't think that's the only thing, no. But that is a significant research-based process that has proven to be effective in multiple districts around the nation. So am I hopeful for that? Yes. It's a lot of work. It's a significant shift in how we work together, how we plan together, how we look at data together, how we share each other's kids. But that's not the only thing. And so that's why, again, we'll come back to you in the spring with next year's achievement and integration plan. That will be a component to this. As we continue to refine our intervention work, as we look at MTSS, as we look at some of the social and emotional learning needs that our students have at every level, that's part of the work. There's lots of work that we're engaged in. My primary focus, especially right now, is looking at the curriculum, looking at the professional development, looking at those instructional strategies, looking at the way that we organize around data. That's where a lot of my work comes in.
Yes, Director Hocker? One thing you mentioned a minute ago is that you are potentially reaching out to students themselves. Did I catch that? It sounded like you were talking about they're going to find the root cause, you're going to talk to students themselves, and do PD for learning communities with teachers. Did I misunderstand that? You're kind of looking at
I don't
me
know that
like-
I said reach out to, yes, we
Okay.
should reach out. We need to engage with our students,
Okay,
right?
because
That
that
should
was
be
my
part of
question,
it.
is how is that happening? How would you do that? And is that a valuable piece of this as well, is to hear from
More
students
critical
themselves?
questions Is what you were talking about. We want our students to know, how do we know
Right.
if they've, yeah.
Right. So, in terms of, there's the 4 critical questions that I think I talked about, but, it's knowing our students, knowing their strengths, knowing their areas. BAR does a lot of that work in really engaging where the students' strengths are. As I think about specifically connecting with kids, within our achievement integration, there are a number of student groups that staff are engaged with to get a pulse on what's school like right now? What's learning like? Beyond learning, beyond the classroom, what's your experience like? So we can maybe talk a little bit more about that, but that's a component within our various student groups. Certainly at the high school, there's lots of engagement with students around what they're learning, how they're learning, and how we can rethink what we're doing.
I guess what I was thinking when you mentioned that is there are so many pieces that you've talked about wrapping around our students in so many ways with the BAR program and with AVID and a whole bunch of other things. So I'm just curious, it feels like we really are trying in so many different ways to support our students. And I would just be super curious if they could give us some feedback on what is resonating, what is really helping, and what are we missing. I also have heard of different student groups talking about discipline policies and concerns around bullying as well. So I'm wondering if there's an interplay between achievement and feeling safe and welcome in school, and how does that reflect in their achievement in our schools as well?
It certainly does. I don't have that data here. I can't.
That's
really speak
okay.
to that.
That's okay. But I'm just curious if that work is also
I
part of the
will
big
say,
picture.
too, that we are working with the non-exclusionary discipline grant, and we just met all day today with MDE, and that is a piece of the work that we are doing, is gathering a needs assessment and how students are feeling and getting their voice in that process of not the discipline policy, but the matrix and more restorative pieces to that. So that is another thing happening as well,
Okay.
if that
thank you.
helps.
Yes.
Dr. Porbeni?
Thank you, Chair Sherman. So I'm trying to get back to just the why. Why do we continue to have these gaps? It's been in the district forever. There hasn't been any changes. So what are we not doing right? Or what are we not doing? Not necessarily right, but what are we not doing? I don't know. Dr. Fong talked about cultural competency. That's a huge part. And I think that's something that, a root cause analysis should be done as to the why this is happening. Because every time we come here, we talk about it, we breeze over it, and we continue. If these kids fail, the district fails. That's the truth. The kids fail, the district fails. So what are we doing to change this? It's a bit, for me, I mean, I probably think I know what I think can be done as a woman of color for most of the kids here. And that's what I'm looking for from you, is the why. Why does this continue to happen? And why are we not working to try to change this? You're here 1 year, but I'm telling you that the gaps have been there forever. So what are we going to do intentionally to change this? It's doing our kids a disservice to our children. And I think we should pay huge attention to this. Not just talk about it in terms of, this is what we're going to do, this is what, it has to be a concrete plan. But what is the root cause? Why does this continue to happen? That's what I want to know.
I can't give you a root cause at this point, but I can tell you stability matters. And I think if we have turnover at key positions within the district, then we're not going to gain any traction, and you're going to get the results that you see up here. So I think that, we could definitely try and dig into the why a little bit more. But I also am confident that Caleb and his team and our teachers throughout the district working together can, and the other thing we've talked about tonight, so we've talked about how our students are doing. We talked about what the district is trying to do, but I think another piece of that is families. Okay, what are we doing with our families to really try to engage them to work with us to meet the needs of our students? So I think that's a pretty important piece too.
Director Riley?
I know we talk a lot about turnover in the district, and we have, but, we've had a decline since, 15 at least. Achievement and integration department's been stable. There's been no improvements. I'm curious with the way we set that budget, and I know you're asking for more liaisons, but is there a way, or are we spending our money in those departments the best way, right? I mean, should we not be doing something more academic with that money versus feels? Is it about a music program, or is it about actually teaching foundational skills of learning? I guess that's my concern, and I think that is a big part in this, right? That whole program plays into why we're asking for that money. And are we using that money the best? Should we be using it for more training for letters? Should we be using it for things that can academically help these kids? And think about that too. We've lost the phonics, right? That's been out of this district for years. And kids aren't learning how to read. And that's the foundation of success for anything. So that is my wonder, is if that budget is being spent the wisest way we can.
And we have, I think we have a new team in here who have different, I think Dawn and Winona, their achievement integration budget looked different than what ours did where I came from and what Stillwater does. So we're coming in with a different set of eyes on it that I think will be beneficial when we bring it to the board here in a few months.
I'll be sure to be out there watching.
All right.
I think the board is always wants to, and I know we're not done, but leave these presentations with what can we do in our role to help you, to help our students and families. And so although there's frustration and there's also optimism because we've got this new team that we are really excited to have you all and tons of people who aren't here. But it's always with the caveat of, what do we need to be doing from our side of the fence to help you better manage your side of the fence, so.
All right, 2 more goal areas in the world's best workforce. The next is that all students will be college and career ready by graduation. There are two points that we're looking at for this one. ACT scores. In the 21-22 school year, our average ACT score was 24.1. Now, it's important to note that our participation has decreased over years. A few years ago, the state provided funds for every student to take the ACT. In the last few years, that wasn't the case. This year, we are paying for all students to take it again, so we will anticipate increased participation rates. However, we're also saying students can take the AccuPlacer or ASVAB as an alternate, but we want all students taking some career college ready exam just to understand where students are at. So right now it's the ACT as one of the data points that we have. I did look up last year, 54% of our students last year had reached a 23. So it was reported a little bit differently, but this last year, our average ACT score was a 24.1. Similarly, AP tests, we looked at the number of AP tests that scored a 3 or higher. 3 is important because a lot of colleges and universities either award college credit or waive prerequisites for courses for students who have a 3 or higher. So 71.5% of our AP scores came in at a 3 or higher. This is also one that I would want to think a little bit differently about next year or this year as we go through. Our number of students taking AP tests is decreasing because some of our AP courses we've turned over to college and the schools. And so there's not that external measure like the AP assessment. So we may need to look at different aspects of data to measure how students are performing in those regards. But based on these data points, I'd say that we are on track. Certainly, we'll look to see where the data comes in on the ACT and AccuPlacer and ASVAB as well next year. The last is that all students will graduate. This is also a difficult one to look at, measure, because the graduation data always lags a year. And so we're reporting right now on the graduating class of 2021. Where 91.1% of our students graduated. This is a decrease from the previous year of 93.5%. In 21, 94.5% of our Stillwater High School graduated in 4 years. We can also look at 5-year and 6-year and 7-year rates, but 4 years is the expectation.
Whose expectation?
I would say it's been traditionally expected a 4-year.
Right, but where I'm coming from is the ALC students, by their nature, most of them statewide do not graduate in 4 years. So this is an interesting metric to be, my question is, are we tying ourselves to a 4-year rate, or could we say, all right, 6-year rate, we would want 95% of our students graduating? Because just by the nature of an ALC student, who oftentimes needs more time,
Credit recovery.
it really, it defaults you into not on track. So that's just something to consider moving forward.
We are working with the Regional Center of Excellence with the ALC and the high school to look at, improving and strategies to do that. Okay, achievement and integration is my area. And again, I'll just have the disclaimer, I'm new to this. Eric Anderson is our coordinator, and he is in Florida with his team presenting. They presented today at the National Avid Conference, so on some of the work that I'll be talking about in here, so that's exciting. This is year 3 of this plan, and as we talked about, we will be bringing forward a new plan in February. This information is based on last year's data. So the first goal is to increase by 2% the number of Hispanic and Black students who demonstrate college readiness. Now, this is based upon the 10th grade pre-ACT metric, which says that if you have a 15 or higher, you will be on track to be college ready when you take the regular ACT. So we're looking the data, all 10th graders, the average was 18.21, and the AVID students, their pre-ACT average was 15.5. And by ethnicity, and we're saying Hispanic in this instead of Latinx in this, just as this is how the state still reports the subgroup, so I'm just pointing that out. The Hispanic average was 15 and the Black average was 15.1. So we're on track on that goal. We're right there. We want to make sure that we continue to pay attention to that so that they don't slip. And you'll see in our next goal that is a little where there's more opportunities for improvement that could impact that. So we want to just keep a close eye on it. But we are on track there. The second goal is reducing the number of course failures for Hispanic and Black students by 2% annually. Now, our baseline data, Eric and I talked at length before he left to try to understand this data and make sense of this data, but our beginning data points were very low. Our students the Hispanic students were 3.2% had failures, and 2.7% of Black students had failures. That's where we started. Now you can see, especially with our Hispanic students, semester 1, they had 4.6% failures, and then semester 2, that jumps 7.5%. Now, note that we could have X amount of students failing more than one course, too, with this data. So 74 courses were failed, but it could be multiple courses. And then our Black students performed better than the Hispanics, did not drop as much, but they were at 3% semester 1 and 4.6% semester 2. And I think this goes right along with the comments we were making earlier about what is happening here, why is this happening, and how can we get better engagement from our students, in these subgroups especially, and getting to that why. And this is an opportunity for improvement for sure that we'll be working on.
What grade is this?
I think that's overall.
Okay, thank you.
Can I ask, I know you just recently said, and we heard from our students about office hours at the high school. Have you seen that being utilized by all students, or how is that maybe helping related to this?
I think it will help. I think they've only had 2 or 3 sessions, so I think we don't have good data about knowing how many people are taking, those opportunities, but I think this should help. But we need to, again, engage our students to want to be there and make sure that we are connecting with them and making sure that we're understanding what their needs are and helping to address those.
And then I guess I would always say, there's something I think about having more, which I know is a goal, but having more staff that more accurately represent our demographic of students. I still think that's
on
an
part
area.
of our slides, which we're actually on track for, but I think having our students of color see themselves represented in our curriculum and in the people in front of them, there's lots of aspects of that. And just an understanding and awareness of the cultural differences in their learning styles is really critical. Goal 3 deals with our summer programming, which this is what the group is presenting on in Florida. And this is that each year will increase by 5% the number of participating students who will indicate through a survey at the end of the summer programming if they strongly agree or agree that the experiences with interactive cross-district programming increase their awareness and knowledges of culture. So this is a positive because for 3 years, they have had that at 100%. It's flipped a little bit of the strongly agree percentage to the agree, but you can see 90% strongly agree. So this program is working. It's, we have about 70, well, I think it's about up to 100 students. So how can we replicate maybe perhaps what's happening here into our regular school year and figure out why that's working and how we can do more of that, because the students appreciate that and are feeling good about that. So we definitely have to raise the bar or change the goal here or figure out how to replicate.
Dr. Corbeni?
Thank you. Just a quick question here. We're talking about avid students, right?
Yes, this is a, yes. Yes.
And what percentage of avid students actually graduate and go to college or the military or vocational education opportunities? What's the percentage? Because it looks like almost more than the average within the school itself, right?
I don't have that data in front of me. I know that it is a very high percentage of
Yeah.
avid students who graduate.
Okay.
Yes, I don't have it either, but I can try to find that information out.
And so I really appreciate what you said. Why is this working? I mean, it's a mix of all races within the AVID program, but the truth is it's working. They're doing something right there. So why is that working? And the general population, we're having, the gaps exist. So I appreciate the statement you made there. I think we should look into the why here.
Yeah. Okay, and the next goal is to create that and retain a racially diverse teacher workforce so that students and their communities are reflected in their classroom. So increasing the district's teachers of color and American Indian teachers from 3.2 to 4% by 2023. And our data shows that 3.7% of our current teaching staff meet this criteria. And the breakdown is here. What's very interesting, we had a really great discussion in the World's Best Workforce Committee meeting about this, is we think our staff is underrepresented in that percentage. We had a couple people say, well, I don't know if I put down, what exactly my race is. So that can happen with our students and with our teaching staff. This is certainly a challenge across the state of Minnesota that we need to continue to, look for ways to attract our teachers of color and American Indian teachers. And our Grow Your Own program is a way to help, some of our students that are part of our Stillwater district want to come back and be in that role. So hopefully we can continue to do that.
So Dawn, you didn't set this goal.
No,
but why
I
is it
did not.
4%? I mean, if I'm
I
looking
know.
at our student body population, we are probably 24% students of color, and we're saying we're successful because we're 3.7%.
It's growing, but yes, I agree. We looked at that and talked about it at World's Best Workforce. It's not matching our demographic
right.
population. So
And I
it's,
think that just for a history in the past, I think the board has been advised that the world's best workforce goals are SMART. So they're SMART
They go
goals that are
between
not.
2 and 5%.
It's not where we want to be.
Right.
But it's kind of supposed to be what's attainable within this time frame. So we can, I think we'd all love to see those numbers higher if we could do that.
I agree, yeah. And then the last slide just deals with some of the strategies that we use within our programming. The AVID Wicker strategies are embedded into the classrooms, the instructional coaching playbook, BAR, especially in the high school, allowed staff to better build upon the students' strengths. Huntington Learning Center helped with reading skills. Story Arc, students participated in the storytelling, podcast, film, and creative writing camps, and our partnership with them has been very successful. And then high school students served along classroom teachers during summer success programming and participated in curriculum writing and PD. So those are some of the strategies used. And again, as we move forward, we'll be working with Eric and Cornelius and gathering input and looking at ways that we can work on this program for our next grant cycle, and what is important and what do we need to do, and how can that impact our academics and meet our students' needs, and getting that high level of engagement so all of our students are seen.
Any questions? Yes, Dr. Formy.
Thank you. I know that in the summer, there's a program that I think students of color actually participate in, the teaching program.
Yes.
How successful has that been?
So that is the summer success program that we articulated here. So the students that and I wish Eric was here because he will speak eloquently on
yes.
the experiences and perspectives that kids are having. But and not only that, but the teachers who are our Stillwater teachers who are working alongside our high school students, working with those elementary age kids. I would say, the experience is, it's 3 weeks in the summer. I think it's 12 days, so it's not a long-term, all summer long kind of program. But I would say for the time that they're there, the level of engagement that we see with the elementary kids, especially with the high school kids, reaching down and working with them, especially when you consider, much of our as we saw here, much of our teacher force are white teachers, right? And so here's an opportunity to bring additional role models, students, people to look up to, kids to work with, to increase those connections and to increase that engagement. So I would say that's been a hugely beneficial aspect. And we've talked about this before as well. We use that learning experience for our staff as a learning lab. So staff are utilizing new strategies, are engaging with instructional coaches around the reflective process of what are they seeing, how do they learn, and the kids, the high school kids, are engaged in that reflection as well. So and it's been a pretty positive experience that way.
I agree that it's been very positive. And the Century College, I think that's why they get the teacher.
Yes.
There is a scholarship for kids that want to attend is that something that we also make aware in terms of allowing kids know that this is an opportunity for you? If you attend Century College, there's a scholarship for you to have your teacher, degree and licensure and all that. 'Cause I mean, I like the Summer Success Program. It's a fantastic program.
I know Eric had a great conversation with a junior who had participated in this in college and wasn't sure if they were going to stay that route, and they are. And I think this was, that experience really helped drive that decision.
Yes, Director Riley.
Going back onto what Annie was talking about with that program that they do in the summer, at my son's school, the 8th grade students go in and work with the 1st and 2nd graders once a week. Once a week they interact, and it warms my heart, but it's beneficial on both ends of the spectrum, you're right? It gives these kids a mentor, and it teaches the older kids compassion and patience and all kinds of other characteristics. So I think that's really awesome, and I don't know if we do anything here that would be able to allow for that, because our buildings aren't really set up for much of that. But that would be a really, really awesome opportunity.
Great. Any other questions? Okay, we'll move on to our second, thank you. We'll move on to our second study session, which is Amigos Unidos, the dual immersion
Chair
language
Sherman,
program.
you have public input. Public input.
So anybody who wants to make a comment
Oh, is there any public comment?
on the world's best workforce?
Seeing none? Okay. We'll move on to Amigos Unidos.
All right. Thank you, Chair Sherman, directors of the board, Dr. Funk. We are pleased to share with you an update of some conversations we've had regarding Amigos Unidos, especially in regards to a possible middle school program. So as you're aware, our Amigos Unidos dual language immersion program began about 6 years ago. And it began with the hopes of growing with the students. And so now we are at a place where we have 5th grade students, and we are preparing for them to transition into 6th grade. And so as it happens, we wanted to present a framework for what a possible middle school Spanish immersion program could look like. We have met with the administrators of at Lake Elmo and at Oakland. We've met with teachers, Spanish language teachers at the middle school, as well as Amigos Unidos teachers, in helping to frame out some of these possibilities. So one of the things that we wanted to set out our objectives for this work. One of the 4 is we want to make sure that we align our services and experiences with the Amigos Unidos elementary program at Lake Elmo, so that there's a continuity of programming. We also want to integrate immersion students into the middle school teams and electives. We want them to have a middle school experience, the Stillwater middle school experience, but with a Spanish immersion flair to it. We also want to provide 1 to 2 language immersion experiences to students every day. And we want to incorporate the immersion program into the middle school model, limiting any disruptions to the structure of the school and to the way that the school operates.
So what does this look like? So we start out providing more opportunities at the 6th grade level. So the students would have Spanish immersion in language arts and social studies. Language arts would be a 50-50 split, part in English and part in Spanish. Then social studies would be in Spanish. They would have an additional language immersion opportunity with the Spanish immersion teacher during pony time, and then they would have advisory with the immersion teacher. So that's what 6th grade would look like for our students. Then in 7th grade, it just goes to language arts in Spanish. We wanted to kind of build it all the way through to see what it looks like. So 7th grade, we dropped the social studies, it's language arts 50-50, and then they would maintain that language immersion during daily pony time with the immersion teacher. Then in 8th grade, maintain the language arts in Spanish. We talked about having a possible advanced Spanish elective opportunity, and then they would still have the immersion time during pony time. So we wanted just the costs for next year. Caleb's going to go into more costs, but we would want a 1.0 FTE and an intern that would be about $135,000. And then we would have to develop curriculum, and that would be about $30,000. Now, there would be some open time in that first year for the immersion teacher, and we feel that that would be a great opportunity to coordinate the immersion time, also to think about and write that curriculum, but also be able to make that transition for those students smooth and be able to provide that intervention and academic support during those free times. So that's what the whole program laid out looks like, and then the 6th grade cost moving forward.
As we recognize this first group of students would probably be one section. We have 2 sections rolling through. So as the full program becomes implemented, we'd be looking at a total staffing of 2.2 to provide the Spanish immersion experiences. In addition to that, recognizing additional cultural liaison, which we've talked about, which could perhaps be part of the achievement and integration, but recognizing that there are some office staff needs as we support a language immersion program. And we mentioned the interns. That's one of the pieces that we use at the elementary. In the Amity program, we bring in interns, individuals often from Spanish-speaking countries who are they might be part of a teacher preparation program, and so they're gaining experiences here with us. So there's a minimal cost to that. In addition to that, obviously, we have the curriculum development of developing that dual language immersion class. These are just some rough estimates of what that might look like, but wanted to make sure to mention that there are curriculum development costs that would coincide with this.
We talked about what the benefits to Oakland Middle School would be, and it was really important when we had these conversations of preserving that middle school model, and we believe we accomplished that with this plan. We see an opportunity here that there could potentially be intervention periods taught by 6th through 8th grade English language arts teachers, because they would have that one open block where the immersion teacher is teaching, or 2, depending on the grade level. And we thought it could either be done with smaller class sizes, or they could use that as intervention in language arts, which could be really helpful because middle school doesn't have that natural intervention time. And then it would provide us increased support for our Spanish-speaking families.
As we think about other considerations for the future as we consider the program, certainly we've talked about district-wide transportation and the impact that has on programming. We've talked about possible additional sections at elementary program. As we recognize, we cap our elementary classes at 50 students. When those students roll up to the middle school, 50 is a little bit on the small side in terms of section size for 2 sections. So in order to maximize that, we'd be looking to increase the number of students as well. But that means there's a space and a location consideration, so that would be something that would need to be factored if increased sections were part of an elementary model. And lastly, just recognizing the administrative and cultural liaison support that are necessary to support a larger program.
So some of you may be asking why we're talking about this right now. And I can tell you before I even started, I was having conversations with administrators back in June about what the direction is with, we started this program in kindergarten a number of years ago, and now it's getting to the point where it's going to move into the middle school. And so I think middle school registration starts sometime in January, I believe. So we wanted to give the board an update, at least on, okay, here's kind of a future of what it could be. Here's kind of the reality of what next year would look like. But I think, in all fairness, one of the things that I said since I've come in here as the superintendent is I'm trying to learn as much as I can about the district. And, from talking to folks, okay, the Spanish immersion program, dual immersion program, has just kind of taken on a life of its own, and I've been over there, and I'm very impressed with the teachers and from what I've seen. But I don't think you've had a chance as a board to hear K-5, okay, has it met our initial objectives and what we laid out and where we're going with this? And so what I envision is I'm planning on February to come back to the board and say, okay, here's where we're at with the dual immersion program right now. Here's what the goals were back when it started a number of years ago. Here's how we've done as far as achievement within the program, and here are the real strengths of it. There are some concerns that we don't provide transportation to that program. There's some concerns about space, and there's concerns that there's kids on a waiting list. And just, I think we owe it to the board and we owe it to the district to do just a bottom to top, whatever you want to call it, review of this program. And I would say the same thing for GATE. I think we've got good things happening with the GATE program, but I would like to, as the new superintendent, again, just take a look at that and again, when we're talking all aspects of it, we're doing transportation for GATE, which is great, but is the GATE program in its current format the best format we can utilize for the district? So I imagine something like that coming forward later this spring as well. As a new administrative team coming in, and I think it will help us understand a better reality of it, of our special programs within the district, and it will help us provide strong recommendations moving forward to you as a board as we're looking at all aspects of programming and facilities needs moving forward here. So that's kind of the why we're talking about this tonight.
Director Petrie?
I appreciate that. I agree that this program has not really been, evaluated since the beginning. There's been a lot of things that happened, like the pandemic and, just the churn in administration. And so I think that we do need to sort of take a really strong look at what this program has done and achieved and what it could look like in middle school. But, we just talked earlier this evening about the fact that we only have a 2% unassigned fund balance. And if this program is sort of automatically growing, that is a concern, and that needs to be looked at. But you had mentioned that students are signing up for things for sixth grade in January, but we're not going to hear anything about this program until February. So does that mean that there is going to be a sixth grade program?
Well, let me ask you this question. Again, I haven't been here. This year, my first year in the district, there's been talk of expanding at another grade level to sixth grade. So I thought it was important that we come to the board and show this concept, this idea, because it's adding another grade. Have we done that historically, or is it just, we've added fourth grade, we've added third grade?
It's automatic.
So it's been automatic. So I don't want to say it's automatic, but I think when we're asking about expending resources, this is an example of it's been automatic. So I think that this is probably a decision that the board will have to make at some point here. That would be my recommendation. And again, I don't think K5, K6, we're not going to be ready till a couple months to give you a, top to bottom evaluation of this program. So, they could plan on it, but if we don't have the blessing of the board, we don't have the blessing of the board, and then we would not move forward with it. So,
Director Riley?
So no, we have not ever had this conversation beyond elementary school. And so I can't say that you can presume it's automatic because you're entering into a building that is totally different than the building that's coming from. It's not a true dual immersion. There's not enough native speakers to even meet that title. So it's basically a Spanish immersion program that we have. How many students are involved? What's the cost going into the middle school per student? It's an expensive program. Moving into the middle school that is exclusionary. It's not inclusive because not everybody's allowed to participate or apply to participate. So it's not a program that, just the location of it, I know there's been arguments and pushback, from people at this board table and some in achievement integration initially when this came to be, but it's water under the bridge now, but this is the building it should have been in because this building would have allowed the entire district to participate voluntarily if they wanted to and grow it. It could have grown to eighth grade in this building. So to me, that's kind of a sad state. But we're moving now into Oakland Middle School, and that's not even going to give anybody else the ability to participate. I'm having a really hard time right now with where the budget's at, and that it's not an inclusive program, and I don't think it's equitable for everybody in the district.
Pete?
Yeah, so we have, if the child is in fifth grade right now, he's going to be in sixth grade regardless next year. And they're going to have so many teachers and so much space. How does it become an extra cost when they're going to have a teacher and they just might be now a Spanish teacher, right?
So one of the models that we looked at was utilizing existing staff. So you would have one teacher teach the Spanish immersion section or two sections, and then the English version of the others. Well, there's not staff currently on staff that are qualified to do that. So there's a change in that regard. But then when you play that out over the multiple years, then you have a seventh grade teacher who's going to have to pick up a sixth grade section, and then an eighth grade teacher have to pick up a sixth grade section, and then the students who are on one house are going to have teachers from a different teachers from a different team teaching them. And so one of the objectives there is limiting the disruptions to the middle school model. And so as we looked at that model and realized the amount of disruptions to students who, not just to the teaching staff, but to the non-Spanish immersion students, we said, is there another way? And so that's when we looked at if we added, so it is an add to the staffing. So it is an additional 2.0 FTE.
let's talk for next year.
Next year would be a 1.0, right, to cover sixth grade. So one teacher would provide the language arts and the math, or not math, the language arts and the social studies instruction, along with the advisory and the pony time. So it is, this model, this framework is based off of an ad, but what comes along with that as well is if you imagine scheduling all of the students and schedule those Spanish immersion students and then pull them out. There is a teacher who could have a free period, who could then provide team-based or grade-based interventions to the rest of the grade level. Providing those additional support so that 2 FTE, yes, it goes to the Spanish immersion program, but there's the added benefit of providing team-based interventions during that period. Or, again, because we'd have to play that out to see how that scenario plays out, or it could mean lower class sizes in language arts, providing that attention with smaller class sizes, and providing that feedback to kids.
Just a quick follow-up.
Yes.
And then I'm assuming that you have Spanish as a second language in the school already. Is that just going to be a separate deal? Somebody that's just in 6th or 7th grade, now they're going to take a foreign language, they're going to take Spanish, and that's going to be a completely separate deal?
That would still be an option for the students who are not in Spanish immersion. There's an elective class that's taught. As part of this model, that point 2 was recognizing that students, Spanish immersion students, might want an advanced Spanish course, an elective taught in Spanish by the Spanish teacher. And so that was part of that point 2. That Spanish teacher also would be taking on a pony time in order to make sure that pony time could be delivered in Spanish. There's 1 or 2 too many sections of pony time, and so we'd be utilizing the Spanish teacher to do that.
Director Hockert? Okay, so as you're talking through this, I'm realizing just how complicated this is, moving from elementary into a middle school model. And also, my initial thoughts in looking at what we are going to be offering, potentially going to be offering next year with just the language arts and social studies. Now, I have a better idea of why it is pared down, but I'm beginning to wonder, what are the families expecting going into the middle school model? Has this been communicated? I mean, this is kind of the first time we are starting to really discuss it as a board, but if I were a parent in this program, it feels like this is going to be a very different program next year. And do we have any feel for, are families going to be following this into the middle school model? Are we making that assumption that they are all going to sign up, especially those not boundaried to Oakland? So, I mean, are we starting to feel out families as well?
Yes. So I'll share my experience last year, and then you can follow it up. But at the parent orientation, where we met with staff, we met with parents who are interested, there was the setting out the idea that students would grow into this program, that at middle school, the 1 to 2 language experiences was part of that model. So it was never intended or communicated that the entirety of a student's schedule would be in Spanish. And in fact, the way that the elementary model is built, kindergarten, 1st grade, it's about 90% in Spanish, 10% in English, and then it backs down. And so by the time kids are in 5th grade, it's about 50%. And so that's part of developing the English language skills alongside the Spanish. There's additional program evaluation that we need to do to continue to monitor and improve the program. But that is how that model has been communicated.
I was just going to say, I think the staff has kind of asked, and they feel pretty confident that like 38 out of 40 are committed to moving forward if it is offered. And the 2 aren't a hard no, but would probably like more information. Again, we're just trying to figure out, we haven't done, I think the staff has kind of expressed that there might be this opportunity. We don't want to hold a parent night. I know I just got that question tonight or today from Kyle at Oakland. You know, do we have a separate family, night and share information? But we need to know if we're really committing, moving forward with this before we do that.
I have
Go ahead.
one more
Yeah.
quick question. Is the money for this next year, sixth grade, already in the budget for next year, or is it going to be an additional ask of the board?
The budget has not been built for next year.
Okay.
So, again, I think we have some really unique programs in this district that we, consume a significant portion of programming within the budget. And so I think one of the concerns I have is from talking to people, this is a great program. I mean, again, I'm very impressed with it. But from what I understand, there was never a board-level decision to say, go forth and build this immersion program. And through great leadership at the building level, it has grown, and it has grown, and it's grown. And so as a superintendent, all right, if I'm adding resources and resources and resources to this program, and there's been no board approval, that is a question that I have. And so that's why I want to, we owe it to the board, we owe it to the community to go and do an evaluation of this program, K-5, and come back and say, yeah, here's the great things going on, and here's the return on investment that we are getting by providing the resources for these kids and the staff of that building. So we need to do that, and we haven't done that, and we owe it to the community to do it. So when you ask me if we built it into the budget for next year, the answer is no. But I will also go back to, I don't know how the budgets were built prior to me coming here either, so that's the honest answer.
I'm really grateful that you're doing a review of this program. I think it's something that we've asked for at the board table for a long time, and just with a lot of the transition of our staff, we haven't been able to get this. I don't have a lot of understanding on the program other than knowing, I've sat in on the class. It's a wonderful program, great building leadership, amazing staff, amazing families engaged. It's all, I just don't know, what was the starting out goal of the program? Did it accomplish the goal? I mean, we looked earlier in the spring at the costs of moving a program and dedicating a building to itself, and it wasn't in the budget. But is it an initiative that we bring to taxpayers and to grow? I don't know. At what point do we continue to, and we don't know those answers until we have this February conversation, but we tend to kind of have this creep of programming, and I don't know at what time we have to kind of see if the taxpayers value this and want to see it expand. But we did look at that before, and it was very expensive. So, Dr. Riley?
Yeah, it's expensive, but we can put 2 other programs into this building, so that really negates that conversation. That's really irritating that it keeps being brought up to that. By looking at your numbers of $165,000 at 40, that's $4,100 per student that it'll cost next year, which is almost as much as a private tuition.
And I will say, I don't love going back on past board decisions and being critical, but I do feel the need to say that our transitions program is state mandated. It's been here for 5 years, operating in a not functional space.
Point of order.
No, Director
Point of
Riley.
order.
No. I'm not calling a point of order on myself. I'm clarifying for the community what you are saying. This has been Transitions Home for a long time. We are updating the space to meet the needs of those important students. The ALC was not thriving at the high school, and we have moved it.
Point of order. We're on this discussion.
You can say that all you want. We have decisions to make on our special programming. We will make those in February. We need to see the stats for what the goal is. Is it accomplishing its academic goals that it's set forth? What are the costs of the program? What is the enrollment? all of these things need to be presented to the board. It has never come to the board before. I don't feel comfortable, though, looking at those families who think it's going to be, moving forward, though, the timing is something to consider. It just feels like we should know these things. And I know that staff turnover is what it is. You're coming into a situation where the program has grown. So, yes, Director Kelsenberg.
I assume the rest of the board also got these. Just in the last week, I've got a number of very well-written letters about the Spanish immersion program, and it gave me a lot of more understanding than I had. I just had a certain impression of what it is, but they explained it to me a lot better than I would have imagined. And I imagine they're probably watching this meeting tonight because of the discussion. And I would encourage those people that wrote those letters to maybe, they described it so well, and if they could do that kind of to add to whatever presentation you're making, because they're the ones that are in it, and they're saying what they're getting from it. And so anyway, if you're watching this, put that together and let's get it to them, because it explained it well to me, so thank you.
Yeah, and again, I just want to say, I mean, the program, I've sat in on it, it's excellent. I mean, it is an excellent, excellent program. I just think it hasn't benefited from a programmatic analysis of what was its intent. Maybe that intent has changed. I don't even know if it was supposed to grow to the middle school when it was initially formed. I think it was as a community member, I just heard it was more of a achievement closing, a program to help with achievement gaps was one of the goals I think that we had heard as a
It was
community member.
supposed to be in every school, every elementary, where we're supposed to have Spanish.
So is it doing that? And how can we best serve our students, knowing that we have limited resources and we have a lot of needs, as was demonstrated tonight in our earlier presentation. So it's all, weighing those needs and going, but it starts with the presentation in February. So thank you for getting that started.
Yeah, and just to piggyback on that, I mean, I'm sure that we are going to hear, because it seems to me that once a program that's immersion like this goes to the middle school, and they're only getting like one class a day or two classes a day, you can't really call it an immersion program anymore. But on the other hand, we have given these students this proficiency or near proficiency in a world language, and we don't want to just let it die on the vine, right? So I mean, do we have a different word for it when it goes to the middle school? I don't know, but I mean, I think that this has to be part of the conversation. We also have to consider equity issues, in terms of world language. Should we have world language in all our elementary schools? And is this something that, we're depriving the majority of our district of this opportunity? And I think this has to be part of whatever presentation comes to us in February as well.
And then also just looking at, I mean, we're talking now about middle school, but what does this look like in high school? Does it have a presence? I mean, all these questions that really can't be answered until I think we just take a full look.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Any other questions? We're going to move into closed session now. Get my statement. Thank you very much. I motion to move to a closed session per Minnesota Statute 13D05, Subdivision 3B, and per Minnesota Statute 13D03B. The governing body of a public employer may, by a majority vote in a public meeting, decide to hold a closed meeting for a confidential attorney-client discussion regarding pending litigation in the matter ISD 834 versus Ian Properties LLC et al. and to consider strategy for labor negotiations, including negotiation strategies or developments or discussion and review of labor negotiation proposals conducted pursuant to sections 179A.01 to 179A.25. Can I get a second?
Second.
Okay, Director Petrie, second. All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Motion carries, and we will now move into closed session.
Where are we going, Joan?